My mother threw me out into the freezing snow on Christmas Eve, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a bitter warning that I would never survive without her family name. Desperate and shivering, I walked into a high-end wealth management bank the next morning to use a rusted metal card my late grandfather had secretly left me. When I handed it over, the branch manager turned, ghost pale, locked the VIP doors and whispered, "Ma, and please sit down, you need to see this." I was absolutely shocked by the empire that appeared on his screen. Before I tell you how that rusted piece of metal brought my mother's entire fake dynasty crashing to the ground, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family and had to build your own table. The nightmare began 12 hours earlier at my mother Corinne's annual Christmas gala. Growing up in Atlanta, my mother made sure everyone knew we were part of the black elite. Our sprawling estate in Buckhead was designed for one purpose, and that was to show off. That night, the house was packed with 40 of the city's most influential doctors, lawyers, and business owners. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner of the grand living room, while servers passed around expensive champagne and catered plates of crab-stuffed mushrooms. I am Nia, 28 years old, and I have spent my entire life being the disappointment in a family obsessed with status. I stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing a simple emerald green dress I had bought on sale. Across the room, my older sister Tasha was holding court. At 32, Tasha was the golden child. She was a former pageant queen who now worked as a high-powered marketing director. She was dripping in diamonds and wearing a custom gown that probably cost more than my car. Standing next to her was her husband, Julian. Julian was a white real estate developer who loved to use my family's diversity credentials to secure city contracts and impress investors. My mother adored him because his massive commercial real estate projects gave her something new to brag about at her country club luncheons. The room quieted down when my mother tapped her spoon against her crystal champagne flute. She stood at the center of the room looking flawless in a tailored crimson suit. Everyone turned their attention to her. She smiled her signature camera-ready smile and began her toast. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate family legacy and Black excellence," my mother announced, her voice projecting perfectly across the room. As I look around this room, I am reminded of how far we have come and the generational wealth we are building. I am incredibly blessed to have a family that understands the assignment. She gestured grandly toward my sister. "Look at my beautiful Tasha. She took the education we provided and turned it into an executive position. And Julian, my brilliant son-in-law. Your new commercial development project in Midtown is going to change the skyline of this city. You two are truly making history." The guests clapped politely, murmuring their agreements. Tasha smiled smugly and leaned her head on Julian's shoulder. Julian raised his glass in a mock salute, soaking in the praise. I clapped along with everyone else, hoping my mother would end the toast there and let us go back to the party. But my mother never missed an opportunity to elevate herself by stepping on me. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me, standing in the corner. Her warm smile shifted into a look of practiced pity. "And then we have our Nia!" She sighed dramatically, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room grew uncomfortably silent. People shifted on their feet, turning to look at me. I spent a fortune sending her to Howard University. I wanted her to be a corporate lawyer or maybe get her Master of Business Administration. But Nia always had to be different. Instead of building wealth, she decided to become an art historian and archivist. She works in a damp museum basement, dusting off old paintings for a nonprofit salary. A few guests chuckled nervously. My face burned with humiliation, but I kept my expression completely blank. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I just do not understand it," my mother continued, shaking her head. "We come from a lineage of builders and achievers. We move forward. But Nia is obsessed with the past. I suppose someone has to preserve the history while Tasha and Julian are out there actually creating it. Let us just hope she finds a wealthy husband soon, before she realizes that passion does not pay the mortgage. The laughter from the crowd was a little louder this time. Tasha caught my eye and smirked, taking a slow sip of her champagne. Julian chuckled and whispered something in Tasha's ear, making her giggle. I gripped my glass so tightly I thought the stem might snap. This was my life. This was the dynamic I had endured for 28 years. My mother used my career as a punchline to highlight Tasha's success. She measured my worth purely by my bank account and social standing. She did not care that my work was vital. She did not care that I was preserving the cultural heritage of our community, documenting stories of Black artists and civil rights leaders whose legacies were at risk of being forgotten. To her, my passion was just a minimum wage hobby that brought shame to the family name. I thought about my grandfather, Marcus Sr. He was my mother's father, but they could not have been more different. He was a quiet, observant man who started with nothing and built a comfortable life. He used to take me to museums when I was a little girl. He was the one who taught me that true wealth is not about what you wear or what car you drive, but about the legacy you leave behind and the history you protect. He died 5 years ago, and my mother immediately took control of his estate, selling off his modest assets to fund her lavish lifestyle. But he had left me that one rusted metal card with strict instructions to keep it hidden from my mother. I took a deep breath, pushing down the anger. I reminded myself that I did not need her validation. I had a job I loved, a small but cozy apartment, and a life free from the suffocating pressure of her expectations. I just needed to survive this dinner, make my polite excuses, and go home. But the night was far from over. As the guests resumed their conversations and the jazz band started playing again, I saw Julian making his way across the room straight toward me. The arrogant swagger in his walk told me exactly what was coming. He was not coming over to apologize for my mother's cruel words. He was coming over because he wanted something, and knowing Julian, it was going to cost me a lot more than just my pride. Julian slid through the crowd with the practiced ease of a politician working a room. He cornered me near the grand staircase just as I was charting my escape route to the front door. He flashed a smile that did not quite reach his cold blue eyes and wrapped a heavy hand around my upper arm. "Nia, it is so great to see you," he said loudly enough for a passing waiter to hear. "Let us step into your mother's study for a second. I have an incredible opportunity I want to discuss with you." I tried to pull my arm away, but his grip tightened like a vice. He practically dragged me away from the jazz music and the clinking glasses shutting the heavy oak doors of the study behind us. The sudden quiet of the room was stifling. Julian dropped his fake smile immediately. He walked over to my mother's liquor cabinet, poured himself a generous splash of bourbon, and swallowed it in one gulp. He looked stressed. The arrogant swagger from the living room had vanished, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "I am going to cut right to the chase," Julian said, leaning against the mahogany desk. "My Midtown development project is expanding faster than anticipated. We are moving into phase 2 ahead of schedule, and there is a temporary gap in our liquid capital. It is just a minor cash flow hiccup while we wait for the next round of institutional funding to clear." I stared at him, crossing my arms over my chest. "You are talking about $100 million commercial development. Why are you explaining your cash flow issues to an art archivist?" "Because family helps family," Julian replied smoothly, setting his empty glass down. "Your mother told me about that little nest egg you have been sitting on. $50,000 sitting in a low-yield savings account doing absolutely nothing. I am offering you a chance to put that money to work. I need a short-term bridge loan to cover some immediate contractor invoices. You give me the 50 grand tonight and I will pay you back with 20% interest when the institutional funds clear next month." My blood ran cold. That $50,000 was not just a nest egg. It was my escape fund. It was the money I had scraped together over 6 years of living frugally, working overtime, and denying myself any basic luxuries. I needed that exact amount to pay for an elite international archivist certification program in London. That program was my absolute ticket to becoming a senior museum curator and finally achieving complete financial independence from my mother's toxic orbit. My mother knew exactly what that money was for, and she had clearly served it up to Julian on a silver platter just to fund his ego project. No, I said, my voice flat and unwavering. Julian blinked rapidly as if he had not understood the word. Excuse me? I said no, I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. That money is for my certification. It is not an investment fund for your real estate ventures. Furthermore, if your massive Midtown project is so incredibly successful, why are you desperate for $50,000 from your sister-in-law? That is pocket change in commercial real estate. You are bleeding money, Julian, and I am not throwing my life savings into your sinking ship. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He took a heavy step toward me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. You do not know what you are talking about. The project is perfectly fine. I am offering you a favor because Corinne asked me to include you in the family's success. Your mother expects everyone to pitch in. She said you would be eager to finally prove your worth to this family, instead of being a constant embarrassment. My mother expects me to hand over my future so you can play pretend billionaire, I shot back, refusing to back down a single inch. You can manipulate her and Tasha all you want with your big talk and your fake charm, but I see right through you. If you need money, go to a bank. Leave my savings alone. Julian's mask completely slipped. The veins in his neck bulged and his fists clenched at his sides. You listen to me, you arrogant little nothing, he hissed, pointing a finger directly at my face. You are going to transfer those funds tomorrow morning. Corinne has given you everything. She built the life you take for granted, and she expects absolute loyalty. If you walk out of this room without agreeing to help, you are going to regret it. I will make sure Corinne cuts you off from this family for good. I do not need her money, and I definitely do not need your threats, I said, my voice deadly calm. The answer is no, Julian. Now get out of my way. I pushed past him and pulled open the heavy oak doors, stepping back into the brightly lit hallway. I thought the confrontation was over. I thought I could just grab my coat from the front closet and slip out into the cold Atlanta night. But I severely underestimated Julian's capacity for malice and his desperate need to protect his fragile ego. Before I could even reach the coat check, Julian shoved past me, practically sprinting back into the grand living room. I followed slowly, confused by his sudden rush. By the time I entered the main room, the jazz music had stopped again. Julian was standing next to my mother, and Tasha looking incredibly distressed. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, clutching his chest and shaking his head. I just tried to offer her a piece of the Midtown project, Julian was saying, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of every guest in the room. I tried to be generous. I wanted to help her grow her little savings account so she could finally have some financial stability. And do you know what she did? She spit in my face. Tasha gasped, pressing a hand to her chest, her eyes wide with manufactured horror. What? She called my project a scam. Julian continued, pointing an accusing finger at me as I stood frozen in the doorway. She said our family's wealth is a joke, and that she wants nothing to do with our legacy. She is so bitter and jealous of our success, Tasha. She actually said she hopes the development fails. I was only trying to welcome her into the fold, but she is completely toxic. The entire room turned to stare at me. The polite pity from my mother's earlier toast had morphed into absolute disgust. The distinguished guests whispered to each other, shaking their heads. I was no longer just the unsuccessful archivist. Julian had masterfully painted me as a malicious, jealous saboteur who hated my own family's black excellence. My mother stepped forward, her face contorted with a rage so visceral it made the nearby guests physically step back to give her room. Her perfectly manicured hands were curled into tight fists. Julian had lit the match, but my mother was about to burn my entire world to the ground. Corinne marched toward me with her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. The wealthy guests parted like the Red Sea, eager to avoid the blast radius of her fury. I stood my ground and refused to shrink under her glare. "How dare you!" Corinne hissed, her voice vibrating with a venom that amplified in the sudden silence of the grand living room. "After everything this family has done to elevate you, you stand in my house and spit on your brother-in-law. You spit on the very legacy we are building." "Mom, he is lying," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level, despite the adrenaline pounding in my chest. Julian just cornered me in the study and demanded I hand over my life savings to bail out his failing real estate project. When I refused to give him my money, he ran out here to play the victim. "Shut your mouth," Tasha shrieked. She stepped quickly to her husband's side and linked her arm possessively through his. Julian's project is fully funded by top-tier investors. Why would a man of his stature ever need a single dime from a broke, miserable museum rat like you? You are just trying to cover up your own bitter jealousy because he exposed your toxic behavior. Julian looked down at me with a masterfully crafted expression of wounded grace. He shook his head slowly and whispered to Corinne about how he only ever wanted to include me in their wealth-building circle, acting as though my supposed rejection had broken his heart. Corinne's face twisted with absolute disgust. "You have always been a dark cloud hanging over this family, Nia. While Tasha and Julian are out here breaking glass ceilings and building a real future, you sit in the basement of your little museum and resent us. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I invited you tonight, you would look around, see what true Black excellence looks like, and finally grow up. But you are nothing but a spiteful, ungrateful child who wants to drag us all down to your level." "I am not jealous of the man who begs for money behind closed doors," I replied calmly. That was the breaking point. Corinne lunged forward and grabbed the lapels of my wool winter coat. It was a vintage cashmere piece she had discarded years ago, which I had salvaged and meticulously tailored to fit me. "Take it off!" she demanded, her voice rising to a full hysterical scream that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Take off that coat right now. If you hate this family so much, if you despise our wealth and our legacy, then you do not get to wear the clothes I originally bought. You do not get to enjoy the warmth of my house. You do not get to claim the status of my name or reap the benefits of my hard work." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some of the distinguished guests looked away, highly uncomfortable with the spectacle, but no one intervened. Not a single aunt, uncle, or lifelong family friend stepped forward to stop a mother from publicly stripping her own daughter in the middle of a Christmas gala. I stared at her, seeing the absolute madness and obsession with control in her eyes. I could have fought her. I could have caused a physical scene and given them the exact dramatic reaction they expected from the family outcast. Instead, I unbuttoned the coat with remarkably steady fingers. I let the heavy cashmere slide off my shoulders and handed it directly to her. She snatched it away like the fabric itself was contaminated. "Get out of my house," Corinne commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the massive mahogany front doors. "You want to be independent. You want to reject the family that gave you everything. Do it. But do it outside. You are no longer welcome at this table. You are no longer part of this family. Let us see exactly how long you survive in the real world without the family name to protect you." Tasha crossed her arms, a triumphant, malicious smirk playing on her lips. Julian stood tall beside her, looking victorious, as he watched my mother do his dirty work. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my small, worn clutch purse from the entry table, turned my back on the 40 silent guests, and walked out the front doors. I heard the heavy wood slam shut behind me, followed immediately by the distinct heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place. The Atlanta winter air hit me like a physical blow. The temperature had plummeted below freezing, and a rare, biting sleet was beginning to fall from the pitch-black sky, coating the grand circular driveway in a treacherous layer of ice. I was wearing only a thin, sleeveless emerald dress. The brutal cold immediately bit into my bare arms and shoulders, stealing the breath from my lungs. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway, my heels slipping dangerously on the freezing pavement. The massive estate behind me glowed with warm, golden light. The jazz music faintly resumed inside, proving that my expulsion was nothing more than a minor entertaining interruption to their perfect evening. I was completely cut off. I had no car, no winter coat, and thanks to the meager salary Corinne loved to mock, barely enough cash in my checking account to cover my upcoming rent, let alone a surge-priced ride home from Buckhead on Christmas Eve. I reached the towering wrought iron gates at the edge of the property and huddled under the dim, flickering light of a street lamp. My teeth chattered uncontrollably as the freezing sleet soaked into my dress. I opened my small clutch to find my phone, my fingers completely numb and clumsy from the dropping temperature. As I bypassed my driver's license and a folded $20 bill, my freezing fingers brushed against something cold and unusually heavy hidden in the deepest zippered pocket of the purse. I pulled it out into the harsh yellow light of the street lamp. It was a solid metal card slightly rusted at the edges and completely devoid of any traditional bank logos or corporate branding. There was only a raised sequence of numbers across the front and a dedicated hotline engraved on the back. My grandfather Marcus Sr. had slipped this exact card into my hand 5 years ago, just days before he passed away. While Corinne and Tasha were busy fighting over his visible assets, tearing through his house to lay claim to his jewelry and stock certificates, he had pulled me close to his hospital bed. He knew exactly what his daughter and granddaughter were capable of. He knew their obsession with high society and superficial status would eventually consume them, and he knew they would try to consume me right along with it. I stared at the heavy rusted metal in my freezing hands as the sleet melted against its surface. I remembered the fierce, protective look in my grandfather's eyes as he pressed the heavy metal into my palm. He said to use it only when I had no one left to trust. I survived the remainder of the freezing night by walking a mile down the icy road to a 24-hour diner. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth and nursed a single cup of hot water with lemon until the sun finally broke over the Atlanta skyline. By 9 in the morning, the biting sleet had turned into a bitter winter wind that cut right to the bone. I looked like absolute hell. My emerald silk dress was stained with street slush, and my hair was a tangled mess. I was shivering inside a cheap, oversized flannel shirt that a kind diner waitress had pulled from her own locker and wrapped around my shoulders. I had no makeup left, and my eyes were red and hollow from exhaustion. But my grip on my grandfather's heavy metal card never loosened. I walked the final 3 blocks from the diner to the address etched onto the back of the steel. It was not a normal retail bank. It was a private wealth management firm located on the ground floor of a towering glass high-rise in Midtown. This was the kind of exclusive institution that did not advertise its interest rates on the windows, because if you had to ask, you simply did not belong there. I pushed through the heavy revolving brass doors and was instantly surrounded by the quiet, intimidating hum of extreme wealth. The lobby was lined with imported Italian marble, and the air smelled heavily of rich mahogany and fresh lilies. Men in tailored custom suits and women carrying designer bags sat in plush velvet chairs sipping espresso while waiting for their private financial advisors. I stuck out like a sore thumb. A security guard standing near the entrance immediately shifted his weight. His hand rested near the radio on his belt, and his eyes tracked my every move with intense suspicion. I ignored his glaring judgment and walked straight up to the polished mahogany reception desk. The teller was a sharply dressed woman wearing a perfectly structured silk blouse and pearl earrings. She looked up at me with immediate and undisguised disdain. Her eyes swept over my ruined dress, my borrowed flannel shirt, and my shivering frame. She did not even bother to offer a standard corporate greeting. She simply gave me the exact same look of revulsion my mother had given me the night before. "Can I help you find the exit?" the teller asked. Her voice dripped with thick condescension. "This is a private financial institution. We do not offer retail banking services to the general public, and we certainly do not allow loitering in our lobby. You need to leave before I call security to escort you out." "I am not here to loiter," I said, keeping my voice steady and refusing to break eye contact. "I am here to access an account. I need to speak with a branch manager immediately." The teller let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "I am sure you do. But as I just said, our clients require a minimum deposit of $5 million just to open a portfolio here. I highly doubt you have an appointment, and I know for an absolute fact you do not have an account in our system. Please step away from the desk right now." The security guard was already walking over his heavy boots, echoing loudly on the marble floor. I did not flinch. I reached into my small clutch purse, pulled out the heavy rusted metal card, and placed it flat on the pristine marble counter between us. "I do not have an appointment," I said calmly. but I have this." The teller rolled her eyes, fully prepared to dismiss me again. She glanced down at the piece of metal, expecting to see a maxed out prepaid debit card or a fake identification. Instead, she frowned in confusion. There was no magnetic strip on the back. There was no gold microchip. There was not even a bank logo printed anywhere on the surface. There was just the sequence of numbers deeply engraved into the solid steel. "What is this piece of garbage?" she snapped, completely losing her polished customer service facade. "I told you to leave. Now you are just deliberately wasting my time." The security guard reached out and firmly grabbed my shoulder. You are trespassing?" he warned, his voice deep and threatening. "I am going to have to ask you to walk out those doors right now." Before his hand could pull me away, a man in a pristine charcoal suit stepped out of a nearby glass-walled office. He was the branch manager, and his gold name tag gleamed under the recessed lighting. He marched over, clearly irritated by the commotion disrupting his serene corporate lobby. "What is the problem out here?" the manager asked, shooting a frustrated glare at the teller and the guard. "Remove her from the premises immediately. We cannot have this kind of disruption when our top-tier clients are arriving." The teller scooped up my metal card with a look of absolute disgust. She shoved it toward the manager. "This woman came in off the street in dirty clothes demanding to see you. She threw this piece of scrap metal on my desk and refuses to leave. I am handling it right now." The manager snatched the card from her hand, ready to toss it back at me and demand my removal. But the moment his fingers felt the unnatural heavy weight of the metal, he stopped dead in his tracks. He looked down at the rusted surface. He looked at the specific sequence of engraved numbers. The annoyance completely vanished from his face. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his cheeks so fast, he looked like he was about to pass out on the marble floor. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight collar. The arrogant, powerful posture he had held just a second ago crumbled into total submission. He looked from the card up to my face, his eyes wide and panicked. He noted my ruined clothes, but this time there was no judgment. There was only absolute fear that he had just allowed his staff to disrespect someone holding that specific account number. "Sir," the security guard asked, confused by the sudden heavy silence, "should I physically escort her out?" The manager spun around and practically screamed at the guard. "Step back. Do not touch her. Do not even look at her." He turned to the teller, his voice shaking with intense fury. "Close your station immediately. If you ever speak to this woman like that again, you will never work in the financial sector in this state for the rest of your life. Pack your things and step away from the desk." The teller gasped, her mouth falling open in complete shock. The security guard quickly backed away, holding his hands up in surrender. The wealthy clients in the lobby had stopped sipping their coffee and were now openly staring. They were completely baffled as to why the powerful branch manager was sweating profusely and shouting over a woman in a dirty flannel shirt. The manager quickly came around the side of the reception desk. He bowed his head slightly, holding the metal card in both hands as if it were a highly sacred artifact. "I am so incredibly sorry for this unacceptable treatment," he stammered, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Please follow me. Right this way." He gestured frantically toward the most secure hallway in the building. I followed him past the glass offices and down a quiet, heavily carpeted corridor until we reached a set of frosted glass doors marked with a solid gold plaque that read "Private Holdings." He swiped a keycard, ushered me inside, and immediately locked the heavy doors behind us, shutting out the rest of the world. The room was soundproof, lined with dark oak bookshelves and a massive mahogany conference table. He rushed over to a secure terminal embedded in the desk, his hands shaking as he rapidly typed in the sequence of numbers from my grandfather's card. The system processed the request. A harsh beep echoed through the room, followed by a biometric prompt appearing on his screen. He quickly turned a retinal scanner toward me, asking me to look directly into the lens. The machine flashed green. The system unlocked. A massive financial portfolio loaded onto his dual monitors. The manager stared at the screen for a long time. He took off his glasses, wiped his sweating forehead with a pocket handkerchief, and looked at the numbers again, his breathing heavy and ragged. He slowly turned his leather chair toward me, his face completely pale. "Ma, please sit down," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the computer servers. "You need to see this." The heavy leather chair absorbed my shivering form, but my mind was suddenly razor-sharp. Mr. Sterling slowly swiveled his massive widescreen monitor toward me. I braced myself, expecting to see a modest emergency fund. Perhaps $50,000 to replace what Julian had tried to extort from me, or maybe $100,000 to help me start over in a new city. Instead, I found myself staring at a 9-figure valuation that made my lungs stop working entirely. The total assets listed at the bottom of the screen read in excess of $150 million. I blinked hard, convinced the exhaustion and the hypothermia were playing tricks on my eyes. I leaned forward, gripping the polished mahogany desk to steady myself. "Mr. Sterling, this has to be a mistake. My grandfather, Marcus Sr., was a hard-working man, but my mother always said he lost his money at the end of his life. She told everyone he made terrible investments and died practically bankrupt. That is why she constantly fawns over my brother-in-law and his real estate deals. She said my grandfather squandered the family fortune." Mr. Sterling shook his head, a look of profound respect crossing his features. "Your mother, Corinne, has no idea what she is talking about. Your grandfather was one of the most brilliant and discreet clients this institution has ever had the privilege of serving. He did not lose his money, Nia. He intentionally liquidated his visible assets precisely so your mother would think he was broke. He knew exactly what Corinne and Tasha were capable of, and he spent the last decade of his life meticulously hiding his true wealth from them." He tapped a few keys on his keyboard, bringing up a highly classified legal document bearing my grandfather's signature. "Marcus Sr. saw the trajectory of your mother's obsession with high society. He watched her abandon the genuine values of your community to chase the superficial approval of the Atlanta elite. He knew that if he left his wealth in traditional accounts, Corinne would bleed the estate dry within a year to buy country club memberships, designer wardrobes, and luxury cars to impress her friends. And worse, he knew she would hand his life's work over to men like Julian, who used the guise of diversity and family ties to exploit and extract resources from our neighborhoods." The truth of those words hit me with the force of a freight train. Corinne had spent my entire life worshipping at the altar of status. She despised my grandfather's quiet humility just as much as she despised my career as an art archivist. She wanted loud, flashy wealth. Marcus Sr. had always been a man of the soil. He bought commercial lots, historic buildings, and community spaces. He held on to them quietly, letting their value appreciate over decades while driving the same reliable truck and wearing the same modest suits. Mr. Sterling pulled up a secondary screen, revealing a complex web of corporate entities. "Your grandfather did not just leave you cash, Nia. He established an ironclad multi-generational land trust. He transferred all his prime commercial real estate holdings across Atlanta directly into this trust. This card you handed me today is the master physical key to the entire holding company. You are the sole beneficiary and the supreme executive director of the Marcus Sr. Land Trust. No one else has access. No one else has voting rights. Your mother is legally barred from ever knowing this portfolio exists, let alone touching a single dime of it." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of vindication. All those years of being called a failure, a disappointment, and an ugly dropout, simply because I chose to study history instead of chasing corporate titles. All those family dinners, where Tasha was paraded around like royalty while I was shoved into the background. My grandfather had seen it all. He had watched me quietly working in museum basements, preserving the rich history of Black artists and civil rights leaders. He had watched me respect the past, while my mother and sister were desperate to erase it for a seat at a table of pretentious snobs. "I have a letter," he attached to the primary trust charter. Mr. Sterling said, his voice softening with genuine emotion. "He instructed me to read it to you the moment you activated the account." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and read from the screen. "To my dearest Nia, if you are sitting in this office reading these words, it means my worst fears have come true. It means Corinne's vanity has finally pushed you out into the cold. I watched them mock your passion for archiving and preserving our history. They called it a poor man's hobby, but they do not understand that land and history are the only two things in this world that truly matter. A people without their history are easily manipulated, and a family that sells its land for designer bags will always be slaves to whoever buys it. I chose you to inherit this empire because you are the only one who understands preservation. You are the only one who will not sell our legacy to the highest bidder just to look important at a gala. You are the true continuation of Black excellence. Build your table, Nia. They did not want you at theirs anyway. A single tear slipped down my cheek, splashing onto the dirty flannel shirt I was wearing. My grandfather had given me the ultimate validation. He had entrusted me with an empire because he knew my character was solid. While Tasha and Julian paraded around making empty noise, I was given the keys to the actual kingdom. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, sitting up straighter in the heavy leather chair. The shivering had completely stopped. The scared, humiliated girl who had been thrown out into the sleet last night was dead. My mother had stripped me of my vintage coat and kicked me out to prove I was nothing. Instead, she had unknowingly pushed me right into the throne my grandfather had built for me. "Mr. Sterling?" I asked, my voice finding a new authoritative resonance that surprised even me. "Is there any possible legal loophole that Corinne or Julian could use to contest this trust if they find out about it? Can they claim I am unfit or try to force their way in through a conservatorship?" Mr. Sterling smiled a sharp, predatory smile that belonged to a man who managed the wealth of billionaires. "Absolutely not. The trust was drafted by a consortium of the most ruthless estate lawyers in the country. It is entirely bulletproof. Your grandfather intentionally included psychological evaluations and competency affidavits dated up to the week of his passing to prevent your mother from ever claiming he was of unsound mind. The assets are shielded behind multiple anonymous limited liability companies. To the public and to your family, the properties are owned by a faceless corporate entity. Only you have the power to reveal your identity as the owner, and only you hold the power to dictate what happens to the land." I nodded, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the power I now held. My mother had always treated me like an obedient servant expected to sacrifice my own savings to keep up her illusion of wealth. Julian had threatened to destroy my life if I did not hand over my $50,000 to save his sinking project. They thought I was a helpless pawn in their game of status. I looked back at the monitors, scanning the massive list of commercial properties my grandfather had quietly accumulated. These were prime locations right in the heart of the city's most lucrative business districts. I started reading the addresses of the properties held within the trust, matching them to the current developments taking place across Atlanta. Suddenly, my eyes locked onto a very specific address on the screen. My heart slammed against my ribs. I leaned in closer, reading the address a second time to make sure I was not hallucinating. A cold, calculated smile slowly spread across my face. "Mr. Sterling." I pointed to the glowing text on the monitor. "This specific parcel of commercial land right here in Midtown. The trust owns the ground, but who currently holds the commercial lease to build on it?" Mr. Sterling typed a quick command to pull up the leaseholder agreement. He scanned the document and looked back at me. "The land is currently leased to a commercial development firm. They are constructing a massive luxury retail and office complex on the site. The lease agreement requires them to adhere to strict environmental and financial audits at the discretion of the landowner." I leaned back in my chair, the puzzle pieces clicking together in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The universe had just handed me the ultimate weapon. I knew exactly why Julian had been sweating in my mother's study last night. I knew exactly why he was so desperate for $50,000 in emergency cash. And most importantly, I knew exactly how I was going to tear his fake empire straight down to the foundation. "Mr. Sterling, what is the exact registered name of the commercial development firm holding that lease?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying a lethal sharpness. Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and typed a rapid sequence of commands into his secure terminal. The system accessed the encrypted corporate registry. Vanguard Horizon Developments. He answered, reading directly from the master file. The primary executive signatory on the ground lease is a Mr. Julian. Does that name mean something to you? I let out a sound that was half laugh and half gasp. I covered my mouth with my hand as the absolute brilliant irony of the situation washed over me. It was not just a coincidence. It was poetic justice engineered by the universe and my grandfather. Julian is my brother-in-law, I said. He is the man my mother worships. He is the man who just hours ago tried to extort my life savings to save this exact project. My mother threw me out into the snow because she genuinely believes Julian is a billionaire visionary building a generational empire for our family. She has spent the last 2 years bragging to every high society circle in Atlanta that her son-in-law is the king of Midtown real estate. Mr. Sterling looked at the screen and then back at me. A slow understanding dawned on his face. He is not the king of anything, Nia. He is a tenant. He does not own a single square inch of the earth beneath that construction site. He holds a 99-year ground lease from your grandfather's trust. Julian might be taking out massive construction loans to build the glass and steel structures on top, but the dirt belongs to you. You are his landlord. The magnitude of that revelation settled deep into my bones. My mother Corinne had spent my entire life equating wealth with designer labels, expensive cars, and loud public displays of spending. She looked down on my grandfather because he wore old boots and spent his weekends examining soil samples and zoning permits. She thought Julian was superior because he wore bespoke suits and spoke in corporate buzzwords. But Julian was building his entire fake empire on borrowed money and rented ground. My grandfather had quietly owned the board while Julian and Corinne were just renting the pieces. If a ground lease tenant defaults on their payments or violates the environmental covenants of the agreement, what happens to the multi-million-dollar buildings they constructed on the property? I asked, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the heavy mahogany desk. Mr. Sterling smiled. It was the smile of a financial predator who knew exactly how the game was played. Under the specific ironclad terms your grandfather had drafted, if Vanguard Horizon Developments breaches the contract, the landowner has the right to terminate the lease. If the lease is terminated, all physical improvements on the land forfeit to the landowner. That means if Julian defaults, the entire $150 million commercial complex becomes your personal property, free and clear. He would lose everything, and his investors would wipe him out. I sat back in the heavy leather chair. The cold dampness of the flannel shirt clinging to my shoulders faded completely, replaced by a burning, focused energy. My mother had humiliated me. Julian had threatened to destroy my life and sever me from the family if I did not hand over my $50,000. They thought I was a helpless, pathetic museum archivist who had no power to fight back against their wealth. They had absolutely no idea that I held the power to eradicate Julian's entire net worth with a single signature. I do not want to be just a silent beneficiary, I said, looking Mr. Sterling dead in the eye. I am stepping into the role of Executive Director of the Marcus Senior Land Trust effective immediately, but we are going to maintain absolute operational security. My mother and my sister cannot know that I have inherited this empire. Julian cannot know that his despised sister-in-law is the landlord holding the leash around his neck. They thrive on public image and social status. If they find out I have this money, they will pivot instantly, playing the victims and trying to manipulate me with fake apologies and family guilt. I want them blind. Mr. Sterling nodded in absolute agreement. The structure of the trust guarantees your anonymity. To the public and to Julian, the landlord will remain a faceless corporate entity known only as the Marcus Estate Holdings Group. All communications will go through our legal department. You give the orders, and we execute them behind a wall of corporate privacy. No one will ever see you coming. I need a secure phone, I commanded, my mind shifting into high gear. I need a corporate apartment leased under a subsidiary name immediately, so I do not have to return to my old neighborhood where they can find me. And I need a full legal and financial team assembled by noon to review every single clause, covenant, and loophole in Julian's lease agreement. We are going to put Vanguard Horizon Developments under a microscope so powerful it will burn a hole straight through his fraudulent financial statements. Consider it done, Mr. Sterling said, picking up his desk phone to begin issuing orders to his elite banking staff. We will arrange a luxury executive suite for you at the Four Seasons by this afternoon. A personal shopper will be dispatched to acquire a new professional wardrobe for you so you can discard those ruined clothes. You are the head of a 9-figure trust now, Nia. It is time we treat you like one. As he spoke, a soft chime echoed from his dual monitors. A red alert banner flashed across the top right corner of the financial dashboard tracking the trust's incoming revenue streams. Mr. Sterling paused with the phone still in his hand. He squinted at the screen, his brow furrowing as he read the automated notification from the banking software. "What is it?" I asked, catching the sudden shift in his demeanor. Mr. Sterling slowly placed the receiver back onto the phone base. He turned the monitor a few inches toward me so I could see the glaring red text illuminating the screen. He let out a low whistle of sheer disbelief. "You mentioned earlier that Julian tried to extort $50,000 from you last night," Mr. Sterling said, tracing a finger along the financial ledger displayed on the screen. "He told you he needed a bridge loan to cover contractor invoices because his project was expanding ahead of schedule." "Yes," I replied, my eyes locked on the red alert. "He claimed he had a temporary cash flow hiccup and needed my money to bridge the gap until institutional funding cleared." "He lied to you, Nia," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "He did not need your $50,000 to pay construction contractors. He needed your money to pay you." I stared at him, the realization hitting me like a physical shockwave. "What do you mean?" "Julian's quarterly ground lease payment to this trust was due yesterday at close of business," Mr. Sterling explained, pointing directly at the glowing red alert. "The payment was for exactly $48,500. He attempted to wire the funds from Vanguard Horizon Developments last night, but the transfer was rejected by the clearinghouse. His corporate account had insufficient funds. Julian just bounced a check to his landlord." The puzzle was finally complete. Julian was not a brilliant real estate tycoon experiencing rapid growth. He was a desperate, leveraged fraud drowning in debt. He had cornered me at the Christmas gala, fully prepared to steal my hard-earned savings just to keep his own landlord from issuing a default notice. He had manipulated my mother into throwing me out into the freezing snow, all because I refused to unknowingly pay my own trust fund on his behalf. Mr. Sterling looked up from the screen, a predatory glint in his eyes. "According to the strict penalty clauses your grandfather embedded into this lease, Julian has exactly a 5-day grace period to cure a missed payment before the trust can legally initiate a full financial audit of his entire development company. A missed payment of this magnitude triggers a mandatory review of his operating capital. So if he does not find that money within 5 days, I can rip his company's books wide open," I asked, feeling a thrilling, dangerous power surge through my veins. "Not just his books," Mr. Sterling corrected. "You can halt all construction, freeze his site access, and demand a full accounting of every dollar he has supposedly secured from his investors. If he is bouncing lease payments, he is likely embezzling investor funds to cover other debts. If we initiate that audit, Julian's entire fake empire will collapse overnight." I leaned back in the heavy leather chair and crossed my arms. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. The shivering, terrified girl who was locked out in the cold was gone forever. I was the landlord now, and it was time to collect. "Let the grace period expire," I ordered. "We are going to tear his life apart." I spent the weekend in the sprawling penthouse suite Mr. Sterling secured for me at the Four Seasons. The panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline served as a constant reminder of the city I now quietly owned a massive piece of. By Monday morning, I dressed in a simple tailored suit provided by my new personal shopper. I kept my makeup understated and my demeanor completely neutral. If I wanted to keep Corinne and Julian entirely blind to my new power, I had to maintain the illusion that I was still the helpless, struggling archivist they had thrown out into the snow. I hailed a standard rideshare and headed to my job at the Atlanta Heritage Museum. The museum was my sanctuary. I had spent 4 years in its climate-controlled basement archives, meticulously restoring letters, photographs, and artifacts from the civil rights movement. I loved the smell of old paper and the quiet dignity of preserving truth. I walked through the employee entrance expecting to dive into a new batch of donated documents. Instead, I found my immediate supervisor, Dr. Aris, waiting by my desk with his arms crossed over his chest. He was a timid man who spent more time kissing up to the museum's wealthy donors than actually studying history. He refused to meet my eyes as I set my bag down. He nervously cleared his throat and asked me to follow him to the Human Resources office. My instincts instantly flared. The Human Resources director was sitting behind her desk with a manila folder already prepared. Dr. Aris stood awkwardly in the corner, staring at the floor. "Nia, please sit down," the director said, pointing to a stiff plastic chair. I remained standing. "Just tell me what this is about," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Dr. Aris finally spoke up, his voice wavering slightly. "Nia, the museum board had an emergency meeting yesterday afternoon. We are terminating your employment effective immediately. You will be given 2 weeks of severance pay, but we need you to surrender your keycard and clear out your locker today." I looked at him in genuine disbelief. Terminating me, I just secured a massive federal grant for the archive department last month. My performance reviews have been flawless. On what possible grounds are you firing me? The Human Resources Director slid the manila folder across the desk. We received a highly concerning phone call from one of our most prominent platinum-tier donors. She informed the board that you suffered a severe mental breakdown at a private holiday gala over the weekend. She expressed deep concern for your psychological stability and strongly advised that you are currently unfit to handle priceless historical artifacts. She also strongly implied that if the museum continued to employ someone so volatile, the museum might lose a significant portion of its annual funding from the Buckhead elite circle. It took exactly 1 second for the puzzle pieces to click together. The platinum tier donor was my mother, Corinne. She sat on the museum's fundraising committee. Corinne had not just kicked me out of her house. She had actively picked up the phone on Christmas Day to orchestrate my professional ruin. She was using her wealth and her social connections to ensure I could not even earn a basic living. She wanted me starved out, broken, and begging on her doorstep. I looked at Dr. Aris, feeling nothing but absolute contempt for his cowardice. "You are firing your best archivist because a wealthy socialite threatened your budget?" I asked. He had the decency to look ashamed, but he did not defend me. "It is out of my hands, Naya," he mumbled. "The board made the decision. We cannot risk the funding." I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg them to reconsider or try to explain that my mother was a manipulative liar. There was absolutely no point in seeking justice from people who could be bought so easily. I simply unclipped my museum keycard from my lanyard and dropped it onto the desk. "Keep the severance pay," I said, my voice dropping to an icy chill that made Dr. Aris flinch. "You are going to need every single penny of it when the donor funding dries up." I walked out of the office, marched down to the basement, and packed my personal belongings into a single cardboard box. As I walked out the front doors of the museum into the crisp morning air, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Corinne thought she was destroying my only lifeline. She had absolutely no idea she was just clearing my schedule so I could focus entirely on destroying her. I set my box down on a nearby park bench and pulled out my new encrypted smartphone. I opened my social media apps out of sheer curiosity to see how far my family was taking their smear campaign. My sister Tasha was at the top of my feed. She had posted a highly curated professional photo of herself and Julian clinking champagne glasses by their fireplace. The caption was a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. It read, "Sometimes protecting your peace means cutting out toxic, unmotivated family members. As we build our generational wealth and step into our season of Black excellence, we have to leave behind those who refuse to grow. Praying for certain people to find the mental help they desperately need, but refusing to let their jealousy dim our light. Forward and upward." The post already had over 2,000 likes and hundreds of supportive comments from Atlanta's high society praising Tasha for her bravery and setting healthy boundaries. They were wrapping their cruelty in the language of therapy and self-care. They were loudly, publicly digging their own graves. I locked my phone and smiled. They wanted to play hardball using corporate leverage and social influence. They thought cutting off my meager museum salary would break my spirit. It was time to show them what real corporate leverage looked like. I hailed a black car and dialed Mr. Sterling's direct line. The grace period for Julian's bounce check was over. Mr. Sterling answered on the first ring. The private car merged smoothly onto the highway, carrying me toward the financial district. I watched the city blur past my mind, entirely focused on the legal trap my grandfather had laid out for me to spring. "Good morning, Nia," Mr. Sterling said. "I presume you are calling regarding Vanguard Horizon developments." "Exactly," I replied. "The 5-day grace period for the bounced lease payment has officially expired. Have we received any communication or attempted wire transfers from Julian's firm? Nothing." Mr. Sterling confirmed, the sound of keyboard clicking echoing faintly over the line. "His accounts are still showing insufficient funds. Legally, the Marcus Estate Holdings Group is now well within its rights to trigger the punitive clauses of the ground lease. How do you wish to proceed?" I leaned back into the plush leather seat. My mother and Tasha wanted to play games with my reputation, calling me unstable and unfit for a simple museum job. It was time to show them what an unstable landlord could do to a $100 million construction site. "I want to hit him where it hurts the most," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I want to hit his ego, his timeline, and his investors. The lease agreement gives the landowner the right to demand comprehensive environmental and zoning audits, correct?" "It does indeed," Mr. Sterling replied. "The clauses were drafted specifically to ensure any tenant developing the land adhered to the highest possible standards. If the landlord suspects any irregularities, they can demand an immediate full-scale audit by independent city inspectors." "Then authorize the audit immediately," I commanded. "I want city officials on that site by this afternoon. I want every single permit, soil sample, and structural integrity report pulled and scrutinized. I want the site locked down until the audit is complete, and I want it to take as long as legally permissible. Halt all construction." "Consider it done," Mr. Sterling said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "I will dispatch our legal team to coordinate with the city's zoning and environmental departments. They will issue the stop work order before the lunch hour is over." I hung up the phone and watched the towering cranes of Midtown approach. Julian's project was visible from miles away, a massive skeleton of steel and concrete that represented everything my family valued. By the end of the day, those cranes would stop moving, and Julian's carefully constructed world would begin to crack. I arrived at the law firm managing the Marcus Estate Holdings Group just as the city officials were arriving at Julian's site. I sat in a sleek glass-walled conference room alongside a team of razor-sharp attorneys who treated me with a level of deference I had never experienced. We reviewed the specific clauses of the lease, ensuring every action we took was legally unassailable. "Julian is going to panic," lead attorney Ms. Vance observed, tracing a manicured finger over a copy of the lease agreement. "A stop work order on a project of this magnitude costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in delayed contractor fees, equipment rentals, and investor confidence. He will be desperate to resolve this." "That is exactly the point," I said, leaning forward. "I want him desperate. I want him to scramble. I want him to realize that the ground beneath his feet is no longer stable." Around 2 in the afternoon, my burner phone buzzed. I had set up a Google alert for Vanguard Horizon developments, wanting to track the fallout in real time. The notification flashed across my screen. "Construction halted at major Midtown development site, pending sudden city audit." I opened the article, savoring every word. The piece described a surprise inspection by city officials triggered by a formal request from the anonymous landowner. Dozens of construction workers were seen leaving the site, and the massive cranes stood idle against the sky. A spokesperson for Vanguard Horizon Developments declined to comment, citing ongoing legal matters. Julian was officially bleeding. I closed the article and looked around the conference room. Ms. Vance and her team were already preparing the next wave of legal maneuvers, anticipating Julian's likely responses. He would undoubtedly try to file injunctions or appeal the audit, but the lease agreement was a fortress. My grandfather had anticipated every possible evasion tactic and sealed the exits. He will try to find out who ordered the audit, Ms. Vance warned, sliding a fresh stack of documents toward me. He will hire investigators, try to pierce the corporate veil protecting the trust. Let him try, I said calmly. The trust is impenetrable. He will waste more time and money chasing ghosts, and every day he spends looking for the landlord is another day his project sits dead in the water. The first phase of the plan was executed perfectly. The smear campaign my mother and Tasha had orchestrated was still actively destroying my old life, but I was already building the infrastructure to dismantle theirs. They had thrown me out into the cold expecting me to freeze. They had no idea they had handed me the matches to burn down their entire empire. The next move belonged to Julian. I knew him well enough to predict his reaction. He would not accept defeat gracefully. He would lash out, blame everyone else for the delay, and desperately try to find a scapegoat to pacify his furious investors. And knowing my family, that desperation would lead him to make a catastrophic mistake. I left the law firm late in the afternoon, stepping out into the bustling streets of Atlanta. The cold air felt bracing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of my family's toxic dynamics. I hailed another car and directed the driver back to the Four Seasons. I needed rest because tomorrow the real war would begin. I had halted the construction, but the financial ruin was only just beginning. Julian was about to discover exactly what it meant to cross the wrong person, and I was going to enjoy every single second of his inevitable collapse. Across the city in the opulent Buckhead estate, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The polished marble floors and expensive abstract art provided a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unraveling in the grand living room. Julian stood pacing in front of the massive stone fireplace, his phone pressed hard against his ear. His face was a mask of sheer panic. He shouted into the receiver, demanding his site manager find a way around the city inspectors. When the voice on the other end delivered the final confirmation that the gates were padlocked, Julian hurled his phone across the room. The device shattered against the marble floor, sending pieces of glass and plastic skittering across the Persian rug. Tasha rushed down the sweeping staircase, clutching her silk designer robe tightly around her waist. She had seen the news alerts on her own phone, and her perfectly curated world was suddenly tilting on its axis. She demanded to know why construction had stopped and why investors were suddenly freezing their calls. Julian did not miss a beat. He immediately activated his defense mechanism, wrapping his incompetence in a blanket of aggressive gaslighting. He marched over to Tasha and gripped her shoulders, projecting an aura of righteous indignation. "It is nothing but incompetent city bureaucracy," he lied smoothly, his voice dripping with venom. "The city inspectors are just trying to shake down a successful developer. Some faceless corporate landlord filed an anonymous complaint to slow us down. They are jealous of our momentum, Tasha. They see a powerful family dominating the Midtown skyline, and they want to bleed us out with red tape." He completely omitted the fact that he had bounced his lease payment. He hid the reality that his corporate accounts were drained and his reckless embezzlement had triggered the very clauses now destroying his project. He needed Tasha to believe they were victims of a jealous system rather than casualties of his own financial crimes. Corinne marched into the living room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She held her tablet out, her hands visibly shaking. Her meticulously styled hair was slightly out of place, and the usual haughty arrogance in her eyes had been replaced by raw terror. "Julian, what is going on out there?" Corinne demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "Beatrice just texted me from the country club. The women on the board are asking if our funds are drying up. They saw the article about the audit. My phone has not stopped ringing for an hour. People are asking if Vanguard Horizon is defaulting. You promised me this project was untouchable. You promised me we were cementing our legacy." Julian recognized the weak point instantly. Corinne did not care about the business logistics or the contractors. She cared entirely about her image. She cared about what Beatrice and the elite women of Atlanta thought of her. He pivoted his strategy, weaponizing her vanity against her. He ran a hand through his hair, projecting the image of a tired genius, fighting against an unfair world. Corinne, they are coming after our family legacy, Julian said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. The commercial credit lines are temporarily frozen because of the audit. It is a standard procedure, but it means my daily overhead is eating us alive. If the site stays locked down for another week, the contractors will walk. If the contractors walk, the investors will pull their capital. The entire project will collapse, and your friends at the country club will watch us lose everything. Corinne gasped, clutching the diamond necklace at her throat. We cannot let that happen. We are the premier family in this city. You have to call the banks, Julian. Use my name. Use the family leverage. Tell them to open the credit lines. The traditional banks are too slow, Julian countered, shaking his head with manufactured sorrow. An audit of this scale triggers risk management protocols. A bank will take 30 days just to review the paperwork. We do not have 30 days, Corinne. I need a massive injection of liquid capital by tomorrow morning to show the investors we are solvent. I need a bridge loan to pay off the right people and keep this project breathing until the city clears the inspection. Tasha looked back and forth between her mother and her husband, her anxiety peaking. Where are we supposed to get that kind of cash by tomorrow morning? Julian let a heavy silence fill the room. He turned his gaze slowly around the grand living room, taking in the towering ceilings, the imported art, and the sheer value of the estate they were standing inside. He looked back at Corinne, his eyes narrowing with a predatory calculation. We leverage the house, Julian stated flatly. Tasha gasped, stepping back. Mortgage the ancestral estate, Julian, that house has been in our family for generations. It is the cornerstone of our wealth. Julian rounded on his wife, his tone turning vicious and shameful. Do you want to go back to being ordinary, Tasha? Do you want to cancel your country club memberships and sell your designer bags? Because if this project dies, my firm goes under and we lose everything anyway. We are at war. You either put your armor on or you surrender your throne to the people laughing at us right now. He turned his focus back to Corinne, knowing she was the ultimate decision-maker. Corinne, this is just a temporary measure. I have a contact at a private equity firm. They are shadow lenders. They do not ask questions and they do not wait for 30 days of due diligence. They will wire us the cash tomorrow morning if we put the estate up as collateral. It is a high-interest predatory loan, but it does not matter because we will pay it off in full the second the audit clears and the institutional funds unlock. We are just using the house to build a temporary bridge. Corinne hesitated, her eyes darting around the grand room. The estate was her crown jewel. It was the physical manifestation of her superiority over everyone else. But the thought of Beatrice laughing at her, the thought of the elite circle branding her a failure like she had branded me, was a fate far worse than financial risk. Her pride blinded her to the obvious red flags waving right in front of her face. She could not see that Julian was a desperate, cornered animal willing to sacrifice her ancestral home to cover his own stolen funds. Do it, Corinne ordered, her voice trembling but resolute. Call your contact, Julian. Draw up the paperwork tonight. Whatever it takes to keep those women from looking down on me. Whatever it takes to protect our black excellence. Julian nodded, a dark, triumphant gleam flashing in his eyes. He immediately pulled out his secondary phone to contact the shadow lender. He was locking them into a toxic, predatory mortgage with interest rates designed to bankrupt the borrower. Corinne was blindly handing over the keys to the kingdom, completely unaware that she was signing away property she had no legal right to leverage. They were digging a grave so deep they would never be able to climb out, and they were doing it all to protect a facade that I was already tearing down. I did not need to be in the room to know exactly how they would react. I knew their greed. I knew their vanity. I knew Julian would gladly throw my mother under the bus to save his own skin. They were playing right into the final act of the tragedy they had written for themselves. 48 hours later, the predatory loan Corinne had blindly authorized hit Julian's accounts. It was a massive injection of dirty, expensive capital, but it was useless as long as my audit kept the construction site locked behind city padlocks. Julian was burning through that high-interest cash just to pay off the daily penalties. He was a man running out of oxygen, and his desperation drove him straight to a high-priced private investigator. The investigator could not pierce the heavy corporate veil of the Marcus Estate Holdings Group. My grandfather had built a fortress that no private detective could crack. But the investigator did manage to trace the legal representation back to its source. He handed Julian a single address for one of the most ruthless and expensive corporate law firms in downtown Atlanta. Julian did not call ahead. He did not schedule an appointment. Fueled by a toxic cocktail of arrogance and sheer panic, he marched straight into the glass and steel skyscraper, demanding a confrontation with the faceless landlord ruining his life. I was standing in the center of the firm's sprawling marble lobby, reviewing a stack of finalized audit reports with Ms. Vance. I had just instructed her to tighten the screws on Vanguard Horizon Developments when the elevator doors slid open. Julian stormed out. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, but his tie was slightly crooked and his eyes darted around the lobby with the frantic energy of a cornered predator. He marched toward the reception desk entirely prepared to unleash his corporate fury on whoever stood in his way. Then he saw me. He stopped dead in his tracks right in the middle of the lobby. His aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second as his brain tried to process why the sister-in-law he had just thrown out into the snow was standing in one of the most elite legal institutions in the state. I handed the financial reports back to Ms. Vance and gave her a subtle nod. She took the cue, seamlessly melting away down the corridor, leaving me alone to face him. I did not flinch. I stood tall, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, waiting for his fragile ego to construct a narrative that made sense to him. It did not take long. The confusion in Julian's eyes instantly morphed into a cruel, triumphant sneer. He looked at my tailored but understated suit and completely misread the situation. His inherent bias and his absolute belief in his own superiority blinded him to the truth standing right in front of his face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Julian laughed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I heard Corinne made a few calls and got you fired from your little museum hobby. I wondered where you scurried off to after we kicked you out. Tell me, Nia, did you have to beg to get a temp job fetching coffee for the lawyers here, or did they just feel sorry for you?" I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not raise my voice. I did not correct his absurd assumption. I just let him dig his grave deeper. "I am working, Julian," I said calmly, "which is more than I can say for those idle cranes at your midtown site." His jaw tightened, the muscle ticking dangerously under his skin. "Do not talk to me about my site, you arrogant little receptionist. You have absolutely no idea what kind of power moves are happening in this city. You thought you were so brave walking out on us on Christmas Eve. You thought you were making a statement by refusing to help the family. But all you did was prove how utterly useless you are." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "Corinne and Tasha are laughing at you, Nia. They are planning a massive gala for my project relaunch. We secured a massive influx of capital yesterday. Tens of millions of dollars. We do not need your pathetic 50 grand. We are untouchable. You are going to spend the rest of your life answering phones and carrying briefcases for men like me while your sister lives like a queen." I looked at him, absorbing every single word of his venom. He was so proud of the predatory loan he had tricked my mother into taking. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He thought he was untouchable. "If you are so untouchable, Julian, why are you sweating in a law firm lobby on a Thursday morning?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He pointed a finger at my chest, his voice dropping to a vicious hiss. "I am here to handle a minor bureaucratic pest. Some coward running a shell company called the Marcus Estate Holdings Group is hiding behind the lawyers in this building, trying to slow down my project with fake audits. I am here to find the head partner of this firm and rip their client to shreds. I am going to find out who this phantom landlord is, and I am going to destroy them." I smiled. It was a small, chilling smile that finally made a flicker of unease cross his arrogant face. "Is that right?" I asked softly. "Yes, that is right," he snapped, stepping back and straightening his suit jacket. "Now do your job, temp. Point me to the senior partner's office. I am done wasting my time talking to the family failure. I have a fake empire to crush. I stepped aside, gesturing gracefully toward the heavy frosted glass doors at the end of the corridor. The senior partner is expecting you in conference room A, Julian. I highly suggest you go right in. They have been waiting for you to show your face. Julian scoffed, looking me up and down with absolute disgust one last time. Enjoy the minimum wage, Nia, he mocked. I watched him strut down the hallway, his chest puffed out like a conqueror entering a conquered city. He pushed open the heavy glass doors to conference room A, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking straight into a slaughterhouse. He thought he was going to intimidate a team of lawyers into revealing the identity of the landlord holding his leash. He had absolutely no idea that the landlord he was vowing to destroy had just politely directed him down the hall. I turned around and walked back toward the private executive elevators. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a message from Ms. Vance. She was sitting in that conference room, ready to hand Julian a stack of legal demands that would make his blood run cold. Let him scream. Let him threaten the lawyers. He was just a rat in a maze, and I controlled every single exit. The weekend passed in a blur of mounting tension for the residents of the Buckhead estate. Julian had returned from his ambush at the law firm, looking like a man who had seen a ghost. He did not tell Tasha or Corinne what happened in conference room A. Instead, he locked himself in his home office, downing scotch and screaming at his site managers over the phone. His arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by a frantic, paranoid energy that was beginning to fracture the perfect image Tasha worked so hard to maintain. By Tuesday morning, Julian's erratic behavior had reached a boiling point. He left the estate before sunrise to meet with his defense attorneys, leaving his heavy leather briefcase sitting on the kitchen island in his rush out the door. Tasha stared at the briefcase while she sipped her morning matcha. In their entire marriage, Julian had never left his work documents unattended. His sudden carelessness was a massive red flag. Tasha assumed the worst. She assumed Julian was hiding an affair. She thought the stress of the halted construction had driven him into the arms of another woman, and she was determined to find the evidence before her country club friends started gossiping. Tasha set her mug down and unclasped the brass buckles of the briefcase. Her manicured fingers dug through stacks of encrypted financial reports and denied loan applications. At the very bottom, she found a thick, cream-colored legal envelope bearing the unmistakable embossed logo of the elite downtown law firm. The envelope had already been torn open. Tasha pulled out a thick stack of documents bound by a heavy legal clip. The bold red letters at the top of the first page read, "Notice of absolute default and intent to seize assets." Tasha frowned. She scanned the dense legal jargon, expecting to see the names of aggressive corporate lenders or city tax officials. The document detailed a catastrophic breach of a 99-year ground lease. It listed the complete failure of Vanguard Horizon Developments to meet its financial obligations and outlined the immediate transfer of all physical property improvements to the landowner. Tasha flipped to the final page to find the signature of the faceless corporate entity that was destroying her husband. She expected to see a boardroom of ruthless billionaires. Instead, she saw a standard corporate disclosure identifying the primary beneficiary and sole executive director of the Marcus Estate Holdings Group. The name printed in stark black ink was Nia. Tasha stopped breathing. The expensive kitchen spun around her. She blinked hard, rubbing her eyes and staring at the paper until the letters burned into her retinas. It was not a typo. The document listed my full legal name, my exact date of birth, and referenced the direct lineage to our grandfather, Marcus Sr. The phantom landlord holding the leash around Julian's neck, the ruthless corporate entity that had completely paralyzed a $100 million development, was the exact same sister she had thrown out into the freezing sleet just days ago. Tasha dropped the packet like it was on fire. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. A cold, creeping terror spread from her chest all the way down to her designer heels. She scooped up the documents and practically sprinted through the sprawling mansion. She found Corinne sitting in the sunroom, casually flipping through a luxury home magazine, while a private massage therapist worked on her shoulders. Corinne looked perfectly relaxed, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging right above her head. "Mom, you need to look at this right now." Tasha gasped, her voice cracking with sheer panic. She dismissed the massage therapist with a frantic wave of her hand. Corinne sighed in annoyance, adjusting her silk robe. Tasha, what on earth is wrong with you? You are acting like a hysterical child. I'm trying to relax before my luncheon with Beatrice. Tasha slammed the thick stack of legal documents onto the glass patio table right over Corinne's magazine. Read the final page, Mom. Read the name of the person who owns Julian's construction site. Read the name of the person who is ordering the city audits. Corinne rolled her eyes, putting on her reading glasses with agonizing slowness. She glanced at the legal warning, waving a dismissive hand. This is just aggressive lawyer tactics, Tasha. Julian told us the city is just causing trouble. He secured the bridge loan against this house. We have the capital to fight them. Read the name at the bottom of the page. Tasha screamed, her manicured nails digging into the glass table. Corinne finally looked down at the signature line. Her eyes traced the letters. The condescending smirk vanished from her face instantly. Her jaw dropped and the color drained from her cheeks so fast she looked like she might have a heart attack right there in the sunroom. This is a mistake, Corinne whispered, her hands trembling as she picked up the paper. This is a fake document. Marcus Sr. died broke. He had nothing. How could Nia possibly be the director of a holding company? She is a broke museum worker. We just had her fired. She is not a museum worker, Mom, Tasha cried, her voice bordering on hysterical. She owns the land. She owns Julian's entire project. She is the one freezing the credit lines. We mortgaged this entire estate to give Julian cash to fight a landlord, and the landlord is Nia. At that exact moment, the heavy front doors of the mansion slammed shut. Julian walked into the foyer, loosening his tie and looking completely defeated. He had spent the morning getting utterly destroyed by his own defense team, who had finally informed him of the bleak reality of his lease agreement. He dragged his feet into the sunroom, looking for a strong drink. Julian. Corinne gasped, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. Tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me Nia does not own the ground under your project. Julian froze. He looked at the legal documents scattered across the glass table. The realization of what he was looking at hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened in absolute horror. He remembered the woman standing in the lobby of the law firm. He remembered mocking her clothes, laughing at her salary, and telling her to go fetch coffee. He remembered her calm, chilling smile when she directed him down the hall to the slaughterhouse. "Oh my God!" Julian choked out, stumbling backward until his shoulders hit the doorframe. She was in the lobby. She was standing right there, and I called her a temp. I told her I was going to destroy the landlord. Corinne grabbed the edge of the table, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. You insulted her. You insulted the person who holds the mortgage to my house. Julian, you promised me this project was untouchable. You promised me we were cementing our legacy. Julian ran his hands over his face, his arrogant facade completely shattered. She set me up. She smiled at me while her lawyers drafted the foreclosure notices. She knows everything, Corinne. She knows we are out of money. The sunroom descended into absolute chaotic terror. The golden child, the elite matriarch, and the arrogant businessman were suddenly trapped in a cage of their own making. The money they had flaunted, the status they had worshipped, and the cruel superiority they had wielded against me had all been stripped away in a matter of seconds. They finally realized they were completely at my mercy, and they knew exactly how much mercy they had shown me when I was shivering in the snow. I sat at the kitchen island of my new penthouse condo, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. Mr. Sterling had secured this property for me 24 hours after I activated the trust, and it was a masterpiece of modern architecture. The floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the imported quartz countertops in warm morning sunlight. I was calmly sipping a cup of artisanal dark roast coffee while reviewing the latest legal filings from Ms. Vance. Julian was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. The predatory loan my mother took out against the family estate was being swallowed whole by the daily penalties of the halted construction site. The private intercom on the wall chimed softly. My concierge downstairs announced that a woman claiming to be my mother was demanding to come up. She had somehow bypassed the security parameters, probably by flashing her designer handbag and throwing around our family name. I could have told the concierge to have her escorted out by security. It would have been easy. But I wanted to see this. I wanted to look her in the eye and watch her desperately try to manipulate the daughter she had thrown out into the freezing snow just days ago. I told the concierge to send her up. A minute later, the private elevator doors slid open directly into my foyer. Corinne stepped out. She was wearing a tailored Chanel suit and her signature pearls, but the immaculate presentation could not hide the frantic energy vibrating beneath her skin. Her eyes immediately darted around my penthouse, taking in the vaulted ceilings, the custom artwork, and the sheer undeniable wealth of the space. I could see the exact moment her brain short-circuited. This was not the cramped, struggling apartment of a fired museum worker. This was the fortress of a billionaire. She spotted me sitting at the kitchen island. Instantly, her face morphed into a mask of overwhelming maternal affection. She rushed across the room with her arms outstretched, tears already shimmering in her eyes, perfectly cued for maximum emotional impact. "Nia, my beautiful girl," Corinne cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured relief. "I have been so incredibly worried about you. I have not slept a single wink since Christmas Eve. I did not stand up. I did not unfold my arms. I simply gave her a look so completely devoid of warmth that she stopped dead in her tracks, dropping her arms awkwardly to her sides. "You can drop the act, Mom," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "There is no audience here to applaud your performance." Corinne clutched her pearls, putting on a masterclass of wounded innocence. "Act, Naya, there is no act. I am your mother and I love you. You have to understand why I did what I did that night. I knew about the trust. I always knew your grandfather left you something special. I threw you out of the house because you were getting complacent. You needed a push. I had to give you tough love so you would finally step up and claim your destiny. I was trying to awaken the fierce, independent woman I knew was hiding inside you." I actually laughed out loud. The sheer audacity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. It was a textbook narcissistic pivot. She was genuinely trying to rebrand her abusive abandonment as an act of visionary parenting. "Tough love," I repeated, setting my coffee mug down on the quartz counter. "You stripped the winter coat off my back and locked me out in a sleet storm because you thought I was a broke embarrassment who refused to hand over my meager savings to your favorite son-in-law. You did not know about the trust, Mom. If you had known, you would have sued my grandfather's estate the second he died. You only care about my destiny now because my destiny is currently holding the mortgage to your house and a loaded gun to Julian's fake empire." Corinne's lower lip quivered. She pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes, carefully avoiding her mascara. "Nia, please, you have to look at the bigger picture. We are one of the most prominent Black families in Atlanta. We represent Black excellence in a city that is watching our every move. Beatrice and the Country Club board are already asking questions about the audit. If Julian's project fails, it will bring shame to our entire lineage. You have the power to fix this. Just call your lawyers and lift the environmental audit. Let the project resume. We can merge your trust with our assets and build an unstoppable dynasty together." "You want to talk about Black excellence?" I asked, stepping off the bar stool and walking slowly toward her. "Let us talk about it. You had a brilliant daughter who dedicated her life to preserving the history of our people. I was archiving the actual legacies of civil rights leaders. But you called it a poor man's hobby. You were so desperate for the approval of high society that you mortgaged the ancestral home your own father bought with his blood and sweat just to bail out a white scam artist who uses our family name as a diversity token to secure loans. You sold out your own daughter and your own history for a seat at a table of pretentious snobs. Julian is family." Corinne pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "He made a mistake, but he is a visionary. If he goes to prison, Tasha will be ruined. I will lose the estate. We will lose everything. Nia, I am begging you as your mother, save our legacy." I looked at her perfectly manicured hands, begging for salvation. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant comparisons to Tasha, The public humiliations, and the cold, freezing night she told me I would never survive without her. "The grace period is over, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. Julian missed his lease payment. He violated the environmental covenants. He embezzled investor funds to cover his personal debts, and he lied to you about all of it. I am not lifting the audit. I am not saving his project. And I am absolutely not saving the house you gladly handed over to him. Corinne dropped the handkerchief. The tears instantly vanished from her eyes, replaced by the familiar, vicious glare I had known my entire life. The mask was completely gone. She realized the emotional manipulation had failed entirely. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "I gave you life. I raised you in luxury. You think because you have a fancy lawyer and a piece of paper you can destroy your own blood. You think you can take down a man like Julian. He will crush you. We will crush you. I will go to a judge and prove you are mentally unfit to manage a single dime of my father's money. I will tell the court you are having a psychotic break. We will have you committed and take control of that trust before the week is over." I smiled, stepping back and gesturing toward the private elevator. "You are welcome to try, Mom. The doors are open. Get out of my penthouse." Corinne glared at me with pure hatred, her chest heaving with rage. She spun on her heel and marched back into the elevator, jabbing the lobby button with her finger. She had come begging for mercy and left promising a war. She thought the threat of weaponizing my mental health would scare me into submission. She had absolutely no idea that I was already 5 steps ahead, and her empty threats were playing perfectly into the trap I had set for them. The polished steel doors of the private elevator slid shut, sealing away my mother's toxic presence. I did not waste a single second standing around to process her empty threats. I walked straight back to my kitchen island, picked up my encrypted phone, and dialed Ms. Vance. I told her Corinne was preparing to weaponize family court. My mother was about to play the mental health card, a desperate, despicable tactic to steal the Marcus Estate Holdings Group through a forced conservatorship. Ms. Vance simply instructed me to gather any previous medical records I had and wait for the inevitable legal strike. Corinne and Julian did not waste any time. The very next morning, a court-appointed process server bypassed the concierge downstairs and handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. I stood in my marble foyer and opened the documents. The sheer cruelty printed on those pages was breathtaking. Julian had hired a notoriously aggressive family law attorney in Fulton County to file an emergency ex parte petition for conservatorship. They were officially asking a judge to declare me mentally incompetent to manage my own finances, let alone a 9-figure commercial real estate trust. I read through the affidavits attached to the petition. Corinne had submitted a sworn statement dripping with manufactured maternal grief. She painted a picture of a deeply disturbed, paranoid daughter who had suffered a severe psychotic break on Christmas Eve. She claimed my sudden departure from the family home was a manic episode and that my assumption of the trust was a delusion of grandeur that threatened to bankrupt our generational wealth. But the most vicious part of their legal assault was how they twisted my actual trauma against me. Years ago, the constant emotional abuse, the relentless comparisons to Tasha, and the suffocating pressure of Corinne's high society expectations had driven me to seek professional therapy. I had spent hours in a safe clinical environment, trying to heal from the exact damage my mother had inflicted. Now Corinne and Julian were using those therapy sessions as weapons. They claimed my history of seeking psychological help was proof of chronic instability. They explicitly argued that my decision to halt the Midtown construction site was an act of irrational, vindictive sabotage driven by deep-seated mental illness rather than a legitimate financial audit. Their goal was crystal clear. They wanted the family court judge to freeze my executive powers, strip me of my autonomy, and install Corinne as my legal conservator. If she gained conservatorship, she would have absolute unchecked control over the Marcus Senior Land Trust. She could instantly lift the environmental audit, forgive Julian's bounced lease payments, and legally hand over my grandfather's entire commercial empire to save her son-in-law from federal prison. I placed the vile documents on the kitchen counter and felt a cold, calculated calm wash over me. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought the stigma of mental health struggles would shame me into hiding, forcing me to surrender the keys to the kingdom to avoid a public trial. They severely underestimated the ghost of Marcus Sr. I arrived at the law firm an hour later, tossing the conservatorship petition onto the heavy oak conference table. Mr. Sterling and Miss Vance reviewed the documents with expressions of absolute professional disgust. "This is a classic predatory maneuver," Ms. Vance stated, flipping through Corinne's sworn affidavit. "They are trying to fast-track a temporary conservatorship by claiming your actions represent an immediate financial danger to the estate. They want to bypass a full competency hearing by presenting this as a corporate emergency." "Can they actually freeze the trust with this garbage?" I asked, taking a seat across from her. Mr. Sterling let out a dark, knowing chuckle. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Nia, your grandfather was a visionary. He knew your mother was ruthless, and he knew exactly what kind of legal warfare she would wage to get her hands on this land. When he drafted the trust, he built in a psychological fortress." Ms. Vance opened a locked drawer and pulled out a thick leather-bound dossier. She slid it across the table toward me. "In order to maintain your status as the executive director of the trust, your grandfather mandated that you undergo a rigorous, independent psychological evaluation every single year. You have been doing this for the past 5 years without even realizing its true legal purpose. Those routine wellness checks we required you to attend at the private clinic were conducted by top-tier forensic psychiatrists." I stared at the dossier in awe. Every single year, the trust administrators had sent me to a luxury medical facility for what they called standard beneficiary health screenings. I thought it was just corporate red tape. "We hold 5 years of sworn notarized affidavits from board-certified medical professionals confirming that you are exceptionally highly functioning, completely rational, and entirely fit to manage complex financial assets," Mr. Sterling explained. "If Julian and Corinne take this garbage petition in front of a judge, we will bury them under a mountain of ironclad medical evidence. The judge will throw their case out and likely sanction their attorney for filing a frivolous, malicious lawsuit." I touched the leather dossier, feeling the immense protective power of my grandfather reaching out from beyond the grave to shield me. My mother wanted to label me crazy to steal my land. Instead, she was about to walk into a courtroom completely unarmed. But as I looked at the documents, a different strategy began to form in my mind. Defeating the conservatorship in court would be easy, but it would also be quiet. Corinne, Tasha, and Julian operated on public perception. They thrived on social validation. Destroying them behind the closed doors of a family court was not enough. I needed them to feel invincible right up until the moment I crushed them in front of the entire city. "Ms. Vance," I said, looking up from the dossier, "I do not want to fight this petition immediately. I want to play along." Both lawyers looked at me in surprise. "If we smash their petition right now, Julian will panic." I explained, my voice steady and resolute. "He will know the game is over, and he might try to flee the country with whatever embezzled investor funds he has left. We need to keep him right here in Atlanta. We need to give him a false sense of security." "What exactly are you proposing?" Mr. Sterling asked, a fierce grin starting to form on his face. "I want you to draft a ceasefire agreement," I commanded. "Draw up a legal document that looks like I am buckling under the pressure. Make it seem like I am terrified of the conservatorship hearing and willing to negotiate a temporary hold on the environmental audit. We give Julian just enough breathing room to think he has intimidated me into submission. We make him believe he has won." Ms. Vance caught on instantly, her eyes lighting up with predatory understanding. "If he thinks the audit is lifting, he will try to secure the rest of his institutional funding. He will want to make a massive public spectacle to reassure his investors and save his reputation." "Exactly," I said. "Julian's ego will not allow him to keep this quiet. If he thinks he has beaten the anonymous landlord and secured his project, he will throw the biggest, loudest party this city has ever seen. We give him the rope and we let him build his own gallows." Ms. Vance's fingers flew across her keyboard as she began drafting the most deceptive legal document of her career. We called it the Provisional Suspension of Environmental Inquiry. It was a masterpiece of corporate misdirection. It essentially granted Vanguard Horizon Developments a temporary 30-day pause on the city audit to allow for good faith mediation. To any desperate developer reading the top page, the document looked like a bright white flag of surrender. It looked like the anonymous landlord was terrified of a lengthy court battle and was backing down under pressure. But buried deep within the dense legal fine print was a lethal stipulation. The document explicitly stated that the Marcus Estate Holdings Group retained the absolute irrevocable right to terminate the ground lease immediately and seize all assets if any criminal financial misconduct or investor fraud was discovered during the mediation period. Julian would never read the fine print. He was far too arrogant and far too panicked to look past the headline. I signed the document with a steady hand, effectively sealing his fate. Across town, Julian was drowning in the high-interest debt of Corinne's mortgaged estate when his defense attorney called with the news. I could easily picture his reaction in the grand living room. The moment he heard the words temporary suspension, his terror instantly evaporated. It was replaced by the suffocating, unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. He actually believed his ridiculous, baseless conservatorship threat had rattled a multi-million-dollar corporate entity. He thought he had outsmarted a team of elite downtown lawyers with a single filing in family court. Julian burst out of his home office shouting for Tasha and Corinne. He proudly announced that he had crushed the anonymous landlord. He spun a pathetic, grandiose narrative claiming his sheer corporate dominance and legal intimidation had forced the cowards hiding behind the Marcus estate to beg for a truce. Tasha squealed in delight, throwing her arms around his neck and praising his brilliance. Corinne immediately poured a glass of vintage champagne, weeping tears of joy and praising Julian for defending their elite legacy. They did not question why the powerful landlord retreated so quickly. They simply accepted it as their natural birthright to win. But Julian still had a massive problem looming over his head. The surprise city audit had spooked his institutional investors. The sudden halt in construction had caused whispers at the country club, deeply damaging his reputation. He needed to project an image of absolute, undeniable invincibility to convince the banks to unlock his primary funding and ignore the delays. And in the world of the Atlanta elite, there was only one way to achieve that kind of instantaneous social validation. He needed to throw a party. Not just a dinner, but a massive, opulent, highly publicized gala. Julian convinced Corinne to dip even further into the predatory shadow loan to fund the event. He argued that spending $500,000 on a single night was a necessary business expense to secure hundreds of millions in investor capital. Corinne, blinded by her obsession with status and desperate to prove to Beatrice and her high society friends that the family empire was thriving, eagerly agreed. She took complete control of the planning. She immediately booked the grand ballroom at the St. Regis. She hired the most exclusive event planners, ordered thousands of imported white orchids, and sent out gold-embossed invitations to the city's most powerful politicians, real estate tycoons, and socialites. The public relations machine went into overdrive. Within 48 hours, my news alerts were flooding with updates about the Vanguard Horizon relaunch gala. Julian was giving exclusive interviews to local business magazines, bragging about his triumphant return to the Midtown skyline. He promised a night of historic announcements. He promised total transparency and a celebration of Black excellence, shamelessly using my family's heritage and my grandfather's land to shield his white-collar crimes from public scrutiny. Tasha was in her element. Her social media feeds were filled with videos of her trying on custom designer gowns and tasting expensive catered menus. She posted a video specifically highlighting how the family had overcome recent jealous attacks from toxic individuals, a clear, passive-aggressive jab aimed directly at me. She was utterly convinced that she was untouchable, standing at the pinnacle of Atlanta society. Sitting in my luxury penthouse, I watched it all unfold with a cold, detached satisfaction. Mr. Sterling had utilized his banking connections to secure a copy of the highly restricted guest list. Every major investor Julian was actively trying to defraud would be sitting in that ballroom. The city council members who had authorized his initial building permits would be in the front row. Corinne's entire high society circle, the women she had desperately tried to impress by throwing me out into the snow, would be wearing their finest diamonds ready to applaud. Ms. Vance brought in the final forensic accounting reports. Her team of financial investigators had successfully traced every single dollar Julian had embezzled. They had certified bank records proving he had siphoned investor capital to offshore shell accounts to cover his previous failed business ventures. We also had the audio recordings legally obtained by private investigators who had monitored his unsecured business calls over the past week. We had him on tape mocking the very investors he was courting. And worse, we had him mocking Corinne and Tasha, calling them oblivious, status-obsessed cash cows who were too stupid to realize he was draining them dry. I looked at the sleek midnight blue evening gown hanging in my suite. It was sharp architectural and completely devoid of the cheap, flashy aesthetics my mother preferred. It was the armor of an executive director. Julian had set the stage perfectly for his own demise. He had gathered every single person who mattered in his world into one room, locked the doors, and handed them glasses of expensive champagne. He thought he was throwing a coronation to secure his throne. He had no idea he had just sent out gold-embossed invitations to his own execution. The trap was fully set, and the gold was gleaming under the ballroom lights. It was time to pull the lever. The St. Regis Grand Ballroom was transformed into a monument of unearned arrogance. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, their heavy floral scent masking the underlying stench of desperation. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided across the polished marble floors carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and glasses of vintage champagne. A classical string quartet played softly in the corner, providing the perfect soundtrack for a room filled with Atlanta's most powerful and oblivious elite. Every major player in the city's commercial real estate sector had shown up. City council members who had fast-tracked Julian's zoning permits stood near the ice sculptures laughing loudly with institutional investors. Bank executives, politicians, and high society socialites mingled under the massive crystal chandeliers, completely unaware that they were standing on the deck of a sinking ship. The Vanguard Horizon relaunch gala was an absolute masterclass in visual deception. Julian had spared no expense burning through the last remaining drops of the predatory loan Corinne had taken out against her ancestral home just to fund this single night of supreme illusion. Near the center of the ballroom, Corinne held court like a conquering queen. She was draped in a custom emerald gown that pooled elegantly around her feet, her neck heavily adorned with a thick collar of conflict-free diamonds. She clutched a champagne flute surrounded by Beatrice and the rest of the exclusive country club board members. The women leaned in closely, hanging on her every word. Corinne was completely in her element, spinning a masterful narrative of triumph and resilience. She spoke in hushed, dramatic tones about how the family empire had recently faced a barrage of malicious, unprovoked attacks. She artfully described a jealous, unstable element that had tried to derail their generational wealth, heavily implying that she had been forced to make the agonizing but necessary decision to cut dead weight from the family tree. She smiled a brave, martyred smile, accepting the sympathetic pats on the arm from her wealthy friends. Beatrice praised Corinne for her absolute strength, validating the brutal abandonment I had suffered just days prior. Corinne soaked up the admiration, genuinely believing she had won the war. A few feet away, Tasha was putting on an equally nauseating performance. She wore a sheer, shimmering silver dress designed to catch the light of the chandeliers with every step. She floated between groups of investors, loudly bragging about her husband's unparalleled corporate genius. She practically shoved her massive diamond wedding ring into the faces of the city officials, boasting about how Julian had effortlessly crushed the bureaucratic red tape that had temporarily paused his Midtown project. Tasha laughed a high, piercing laugh, telling a group of bank executives that minor legal hurdles were simply the price of true visionary ambition. She used the phrase, "Black excellence," no less than 5 times in a single conversation, shamelessly wrapping Julian's white-collar crimes in the sacred mantle of our community's historical struggles. She pointed to the massive presentation screens flanking the ballroom stage, which displayed glowing digital renderings of the completed commercial complex. She told everyone who would listen that Vanguard Horizon Developments was the undisputed future of Atlanta, completely blind to the fact that her husband was actively siphoning the funds meant to build it. Julian himself was working the room with the aggressive manic energy of a man who believed he had just cheated death. He wore a tailored velvet tuxedo that hugged his shoulders perfectly, projecting an image of absolute corporate dominance. He moved from investor to investor, shaking hands, firmly clapping politicians on the back, and pouring on his signature predatory charm. To the untrained eye, he looked like a titan of industry, but a closer inspection revealed the tiny microscopic cracks in his facade. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. He swallowed his drinks a fraction too quickly. His eyes darted toward the entrance every few minutes, a lingering symptom of the sheer terror he had experienced before receiving the fake ceasefire document. Yet despite the underlying panic, Julian's ego had fully inflated. He genuinely believed his threatening posture and aggressive legal maneuvers had terrified the anonymous landlord into submission. He thought the provisional suspension of environmental inquiry was a total surrender. He patted his breast pocket where he kept a folded copy of the document, treating it like a shield of invincibility. He approached a circle of his primary institutional investors, the exact men he had been actively defrauding for months. He raised his glass to them, apologizing smoothly for the brief unfortunate delay in construction, and confidently promised that their quarterly returns would exceed every single projection. The investors smiled and nodded, pacified by the free-flowing alcohol and the sheer opulence of the event. Julian drank in their trust, his chest swelling with the arrogant certainty that he was the smartest man in the room. A sharp chime echoed through the ballroom as the event planners signaled the start of the main presentation. The string quartet faded into silence. The bright overhead chandeliers dimmed slightly, casting a dramatic theatrical spotlight directly onto the main stage. The low hum of conversation dissolved into an expectant hush as the guests turned their attention to the podium. Julian handed his empty glass to a passing waiter and strode confidently up the carpeted steps. He adjusted the microphone, looking out over the sea of wealthy, powerful faces. Corinne and Tasha took their places in the front row, beaming with unadulterated pride. Julian gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward to project an aura of profound, visionary leadership. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Julian began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered in this room to celebrate more than just a real estate development. We are celebrating the unstoppable, undeniable power of resilience. Over the past week, Vanguard Horizon Developments faced challenges that would have broken a lesser company. We faced cowardly anonymous attempts to stall our progress. We faced bureaucratic hurdles designed to stifle our momentum. But we did not break. We stood firm, we fought back, and we emerged completely victorious." The crowd erupted into polite applause. Corinne clapped, the loudest tears of absolute joy shimmering in her eyes. Julian raised a hand to quiet the room, his smile widening into a triumphant grin. Julian pointed to the digital renderings on the massive screens behind him. He detailed the luxury retail spaces, the exclusive penthouse suites, and the state-of-the-art corporate offices that he claimed were already fully leased. He spun a web of financial projections so wildly fabricated it bordered on sheer fantasy. He spoke of record-breaking profit margins and guaranteed returns, expertly seducing the very people he planned to leave holding the bag. "This project is a testament to the strength of family." Julian continued, gesturing grandly toward Tasha and Corinne. "I stand here tonight representing a legacy of Black excellence, building a future that honors the history of this great city. The temporary suspension of our construction site is officially over. Tomorrow morning, the cranes will move again. Tomorrow morning, we resume building the crown jewel of the Atlanta skyline, and I promise every single one of you standing in this room tonight, nothing and no one will ever stand in our way again." He lifted a fresh glass of champagne, brought to him by an assistant. "I want to raise a toast to my beautiful wife Tasha and my incredible mother-in-law Corinne." Julian proclaimed, his voice echoing across the silent ballroom. Without their unwavering support, without their willingness to make the hard sacrifices necessary to protect our inner circle, none of this would be possible. They understand that true success requires cutting away the anchors that hold you down. To the future of Vanguard Horizon developments, and to the unstoppable legacy of our family. The crowd raised their glasses in unison. A chorus of cheers and applause filled the grand space. Julian stood at the podium soaking in the absolute adoration of the city's elite. He had successfully sold his lie to the world. He felt like a king wearing an unbreakable crown, completely unaware that the heavy wooden doors at the back of the grand ballroom were about to swing wide open. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding crack that echoed high above the applause. The sound was so sharp and authoritative that the string quartet immediately faltered. The lead violinist lowered his bow, and a sudden suffocating silence swept over the entire room. The sea of wealthy investors and elite socialites parted instinctively, creating a wide, clear path straight down the center aisle. I stepped over the threshold wearing the midnight blue architectural gown my personal shopper had curated. There was no trace of the shivering, humiliated woman they had cast out into the freezing sleet. I moved with the absolute, unshakable certainty of someone who owned the very floor beneath their feet. Flanking me was a phalanx of pure corporate power. Mr. Sterling walked to my right, clutching a thick leather-bound portfolio. Ms. Vance walked to my left, accompanied by 5 of Atlanta's most terrifying corporate litigators and 2 senior forensic accountants. We did not look like party crashers, we looked like a financial execution squad. Up on the stage, Julian's triumphant smile vanished instantly. The champagne glass in his hand trembled, spilling drops of expensive vintage onto the polished podium. He looked past me, his eyes locking onto the faces of the elite lawyers marching steadily at my side. Pure, unadulterated panic completely washed away his arrogant facade. "Security!" Julian shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Guards, remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing. Get her out of here right now." 2 massive security guards in dark suits moved quickly from the perimeter of the ballroom, stepping into the center aisle to block my path. Corinne stood up from her front row seat, her face flushed with furious indignation, while Tasha shrieked at me to go back to the museum where I belonged. Ms. Vance did not even slow her pace. She simply reached into her tailored blazer and held up a single crisp, legal document bearing the unmistakable seal of a federal judge. The head of security, a seasoned professional who knew exactly which legal sharks ruled the city of Atlanta, recognized Ms. Vance immediately. He looked at the document, looked at the terrifying wall of bespoke suits backing me up, and instantly raised a closed fist in the air. "Stand down!" The security chief ordered his men, stepping back and clearing the aisle. "Do not touch her. They are legally permitted to be here." Julian grabbed the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning stark white. He watched in absolute horror as the guards retreated into the shadows. Corinne gasped, sinking back into her chair as if all the strength had been drained from her legs. Tasha stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. I walked up the carpeted steps of the stage, my heels clicking methodically against the wood. Julian backed away from the podium, sweating profusely as I stepped right into his spotlight. I did not look at my mother or my sister. I simply reached out, took the microphone from the stand, and looked out over the sea of Julian's bewildered investors. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the grand ballroom. "Julian just spoke to you about transparency, resilience, and building a legacy. I completely agree. So let us be perfectly transparent. My name is Nia, and I am the executive director of the Marcus Estate Holdings Group. I am the sole owner of the land sitting beneath Vanguard Horizon Developments. Julian is not a visionary king building an empire. He is my tenant, and he is currently in absolute default." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I did not give them a moment to recover. I turned and nodded to Ms. Vance. She tapped her tablet, and the massive screens behind me instantly shifted. The glowing architectural renderings of Julian's fake development vanished. They were replaced by high-resolution scans of forensic accounting reports, offshore bank statements, and wire transfer logs highlighted in bright red. Julian did not halt construction because of a bureaucratic shakedown, I announced, projecting my voice over the rising murmurs of the elite investors. He missed his required lease payment because his corporate accounts are completely empty. He has spent the last 8 months embezzling your capital. These documents prove he systematically siphoned over $40 million of your investments into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands to pay off his own private catastrophic debts from prior bankruptcies. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The wealthy investors Julian had just toasted stared at the screens in sheer horror. Several men in the front row immediately pulled out their cell phones, their fingers flying across the screens as they frantically dialed their wealth managers to freeze their assets. Julian lunged for the microphone, his face a mask of pure terror, but two of the corporate litigators stepped smoothly in front of him, forcing him back. I turned my gaze down to the front row, locking eyes with my mother and sister. They sat perfectly still, paralyzed by the sudden obliteration of their social standing. Corinne looked like she might stop breathing entirely. Julian did not just defraud his investors. I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet resonance that commanded the room. He exploited the very family he claimed to cherish. He used our name, our history, and our diversity as a shield for his crimes. Do not just take my word for it. Let us hear it directly from the visionary himself. I gave a final nod to my legal team. The forensic accountant pressed a button. A crystal-clear audio recording legally obtained from Julian's unsecured business line blasted through the state-of-the-art sound system. Julian's arrogant, mocking voice filled the room. Corinne and Tasha are nothing but gullible, status-obsessed cash cows. Throw a little fake empowerment rhetoric in their faces, and they will sign away their ancestral estate without reading a single page. I am going to bleed them entirely dry and disappear before the first brick is even laid. A horrified, synchronized gasp swept through the crowd. Tasha let out a guttural, agonizing scream, covering her ears as her perfect marriage dissolved into a humiliating public spectacle. Corinne slumped forward, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, completely drowned out by the sound of furious investors shouting into their phones and demanding Julian's immediate arrest. The sharp shatter of Corinne's crystal glass was instantly swallowed by a sound far more terrifying to the Atlanta elite. From the streets outside the St. Regis, the shrill, piercing wail of multiple police sirens cut through the winter night. The high-pitched mechanical screams grew louder by the second, bouncing off the surrounding skyscrapers until they seemed to vibrate the very floorboards of the grand ballroom. Julian froze. His panicked eyes darted wildly toward the emergency exits at the side of the stage. He took one step backward, his survival instincts finally overriding his shattered ego. He turned to run, but he did not even make it to the edge of the velvet curtains. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open this time, they were thrown violently apart. A tactical unit of FBI agents wearing dark navy windbreakers flooded into the opulent space. Their presence instantly drained the last remaining drops of oxygen from the room. Miss Vance stood calmly at the edge of the stage, her arms crossed perfectly over her chest. My legal team had not simply audited Vanguard Horizon Developments. They had handed over a mountain of certified irrefutable evidence of interstate wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement directly to the federal authorities 3 days ago. The lead agent marched straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked onto Julian. Federal agents swarmed the stage, bypassing me entirely. They grabbed Julian by the shoulders of his bespoke velvet tuxedo and slammed him face first against the podium. The sharp, unmistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the microphone, broadcasting his absolute downfall to the entire room. Tasha completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, her shimmering silver dress catching on the stairs as she scrambled toward the federal agents. She clawed frantically at the air, her face streaked with ruined mascara. "You cannot do this!" Tasha shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. "Do you know who we are? We are the elite. We are Black excellence. He is a visionary. You are ruining my legacy. Let him go right now." The agents did not even acknowledge her hysterical demands. They read Julian his Miranda rights in a flat clinical monotone as they dragged him off the stage. Julian was not fighting back. He was openly sobbing. His arrogant facade completely dissolved into a puddle of pathetic whimpering terror as he realized he was going to spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. Down in the front row, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on my mother. Corinne was not looking at Julian. She was staring at the projected financial documents glowing brightly on the screens above. Her eyes tracked the offshore wire transfers, the massive deficits, and the total bankruptcy of Vanguard Horizon Developments. Then the true horror of her own actions clicked into place. Julian was dead in the water. The project was seized. The banks would instantly freeze every single account associated with him. And Corinne had just signed over the deed to our ancestral mansion to a ruthless, predatory shadow lender to secure a massive bridge loan for a company that no longer legally existed. Corinne dropped to her knees on the hard marble floor. The heavy emerald gown pooled around her as she began to hyperventilate. Her precious country club friends stepped away from her horrified by the spectacle, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. Corinne crawled toward the edge of the stage, her hands shaking violently as she reached up to grab the hem of my midnight blue dress. "Nia, please," Corinne gasped, choking on her own tears. "Nia, you have to save us. You have the money. You own the trust. The shadow lenders are going to take the house tomorrow morning. They will take everything my father built. They will leave me with nothing. Please, Nia, I am begging you as your mother. Lift the audit, pay off the loan, save our family." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel incredibly small. I looked at the woman who had happily handed over her legacy to a white con artist just to impress a room full of strangers. I looked at the mother who had stripped the winter coat off my back and locked me out in a freezing sleet storm on Christmas Eve. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. My heart was a fortress of solid ice. I reached down and firmly peeled her manicured fingers off the fabric of my dress. I stood tall, staring directly into her terrified, weeping eyes, and I delivered the exact final verdict she had given me. "You cannot build a single thing of value," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, lethal calm that carried across the silent ballroom. "Get out of my house empty-handed, and let us see exactly how long this fake facade feeds you." Corinne let out a devastating, breathless wail. She collapsed entirely against the stage, burying her face in her hands, as her entire universe burned to ash around her. Tasha was still screaming in the background, fighting helplessly against the security guards who were now escorting her out of the venue. I did not stay to watch them cry. I turned my back on my mother and my sister, stepping off the stage with absolute precision. I walked back down the long center aisle of the ballroom. The wealthiest investors, politicians, and socialites in Atlanta parted ways from me, pressing themselves against the tables. They did not look at me with the polite, mocking pity they had shown me at the Christmas gala. They looked at me with unadulterated reverence and profound fear. I had just dismantled a $100 million fraud and destroyed an entire social dynasty without raising my voice or breaking a single sweat. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the suffocating smell of white orchids and sheer panic far behind me. I stepped out through the front glass doors of the St. Regis Hotel into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air. The winter breeze hit my face clean and refreshing. The entire street was bathed in the frantic, chaotic glow of flashing red and blue police lights. Officers were shoving Julian into the back of a federal transport vehicle, his velvet tuxedo completely ruined. Mr. Sterling stood by the curb, holding open the door to a sleek, waiting black town car. He offered me a respectful nod, acknowledging the absolute flawless victory we had just executed. I stepped into the quiet luxury of the back seat, the soft leather embracing me. I did not look out the window at the flashing lights or the crumbling empire I had left inside. As the heavy car door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the sirens, I leaned back, took a slow, deep breath, and felt completely, beautifully unburdened. The car merged seamlessly into the midnight traffic, driving me forward into an empire that I finally truly owned.